Back in the late summer of 1983, in a quiet suburb just outside of Austin, Texas, there was a house with a white picket fence and a front porch that always smelled faintly of honeysuckle. That house was our home. And that home, though it looked picture perfect on the outside, held a storm brewing behind every wall. My name is John, and I was the eldest son in a family of 4. My younger brother, Ricky, was born 2 years after me. From the moment he opened his eyes, it was like the world especially. Our mother revolved around him, while I was the quiet, bookish kid who liked dinosaurs and spent afternoons drawing airplanes. Ricky was loud, wild, and charming in a way that made people forgive anything he did. Everyone called him the Golden Boy. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Our mom doted on him like he was a miracle child. She folded his laundry, packed his lunch exactly how he liked. It crusts off, no mustard, extra jelly. If he forgot his homework, she drove it to school for him. If he didn't feel like going to school, she called in sick for him. Meanwhile, I made my own lunch, ironed my own shirts, and biked through the rain just to make it to school on time. I didn't complain. I told myself, that's just how things are. Maybe I was more independent. Maybe I didn't need the same kind of attention. But deep down, even as a kid, I knew something was off. It wasn't just favoritism. It was blindness. Mom couldn't or wouldn't see the way Ricky treated me. When we were little, he'd mess with my cereal, once even dropping little pebbles in it just to see if I'd break a tooth. Another time, he scribbled all over my school project and laughed when I cried. He'd rip the pages from my books, push me around, and sneak into my room to read my diary out loud during family dinner, just for kicks. Whenever I told Mom what he did, she'd wave it off with a tired smile. Boys will be boys, she'd say, or worse, he only does it because he loves you. Dad worked long hours at the refinery and wasn't around much during those early years. So his silence, intentional or not, only made it worse. There was no referee in our house, only a ring. And Ricky, he always had the crowd behind him. He wasn't cruel all the time. That was what made it worse. He knew when to charm, when to act innocent, and when to twist the knife. One minute he'd be hugging Mom in the kitchen. The next he'd be calling me Four Eyes and pushing me into the hedges out back. And no matter how many times I tried to stand up for myself, no one seemed to care. I remember once, during a Thanksgiving dinner when I was 11, Ricky stood up and announced to the whole table that I still wet the bed sometimes. It wasn't even true. But the laughter around that table, it made something inside me go cold. My own mother laughed. She tried to cover it up, but I saw it. That smile, that look of, "Oh, Ricky, you rascal." That's when I knew this wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was something else entirely. It was a pattern, a system. I was the shadow. He was the sun. And as the years passed, that imbalance only grew deeper. Ricky got into trouble at school. Nothing ever came of it. I got a B in math. "Why couldn't you do better?" He'd forget to mow the lawn, and she'd say, "It's okay, he's tired." I'd forget, and suddenly I was lazy and selfish. Looking back now, I realize how much that shaped me. How being invisible in your own home teaches you to become your own person, or vanish entirely. I chose the first path. But at that time, I didn't have the words for what I felt. I didn't know how to process being unloved by the person who was supposed to love me the most. I just tried harder, studied harder, stayed quiet, bit my tongue. It didn't stop Ricky. He grew bolder, meaner. The Golden Boy learned that he could shine no matter how many people he burned along the way. And I was always the closest match. But no matter how hard he pushed, I held it in. Because I still believed, somehow, that family meant forgiveness. That one day, maybe, he'd grow out of it. That one day, maybe, Mom would see. That day didn't come for a long time. But everything started to change. The night Ricky almost lit my hair on fire. And that's where it all truly began. Where innocence ended, and something far more dangerous took its place. I remember the smell of burning. It wasn't strong, just the faintest whiff of something off. I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom, working on a model airplane kit I'd saved up for, when I felt this sudden heat on the back of my head. I turned around just fast enough to see Ricky, 10 years old, and grinning like a devil, holding a lit match just inches from my hair. I smacked it out of his hand. He laughed and ran. I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, hand shaking. Then I did what I always did back then. I told Mom. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself while stirring a pot of chili. When I explained what had happened, her first reaction wasn't shock. It wasn't concern. She just sighed. "John," she said, without turning round, He's just being playful. Boys roughhouse, it's what brothers do. I stood there stunned. My hair could have gone up in flames. And all she could say was that I needed to lighten up. I walked away that night with a feeling I hadn't been able to name before. I wasn't just invisible, I was alone. They called me sensitive, too serious, too quiet, too soft. But what they really meant was weak. That word followed me everywhere. At school, where I was the kid who'd rather read than play football. At home, where my opinions didn't matter unless Ricky echoed them. At family dinners, where any argument between us was somehow always my fault. I was the older brother, after all. I was supposed to know better. It didn't matter what Ricky did, stole my allowance, tore up my comic books, called me names. In front of his friends, I was the one expected to rise above it. I was the one told to be the bigger man. And when I didn't, when I pushed back, that's when the labels came out. Don't be so dramatic, John. Why can't you just ignore him? You're too sensitive, son. That last one came from Dad. And that one hurt the most. Because I looked up to him. He wasn't an emotional man. Worked his fingers to the bone at the refinery. Built our porch with his own 2 hands. When he spoke, people listened. But he rarely spoke to me. He and Ricky were cut from the same cloth. Cliff stubborn, good with their hands. And because I wasn't like that. Because I liked books more than tools and silence more than noise. I was always the odd one out. I used to lie in bed at night wondering if something was wrong with me. If maybe they were right. Maybe I was weak. Then came high school and Ricky didn't outgrow the cruelty. He just found new ways to sharpen it. He made it a game to humiliate me. At lunch, he'd tell everyone I still slept with a nightlight. At school assemblies, he'd start fake rumors. He'd walk past me in the hall, muttering freak or nerd under his breath, just loud enough for others to hear. And the worst part, people laughed. They laughed because Ricky was popular, confident, magnetic, and I wasn't. But none of it hit harder than what he said to me one night after we fought over something I can't even remember now. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why don't you just kill yourself, John? Nobody would miss you." I didn't sleep that night. And I didn't tell anyone, either. Not Mom, not Dad, not even my one friend from band class. Because deep down, I didn't think they'd care. Or worse, they'd say I was overreacting. Again, I wish I could say that was rock bottom. But the truth is, I wasn't even halfway down the well. Still something began to shift in me after that night. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was survival instinct. But I started to see Ricky and my family for who they really were. And I started to realize that if I didn't fight for myself, no one else would. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them feel what I felt. It was about becoming someone who didn't need to be saved. And that's when Dad, for the first time in years, truly saw me. Because after Ricky tried to light my hair on fire again, this time while I was asleep, didn't brush it off. He didn't laugh. He didn't say boys will be boys. He stood up, walked into the room, and for the first time in Ricky's life, raised his voice at him. That moment changed everything. Because for once, Ricky was the one who had to explain himself. And for the first time, I wasn't the weak one. That's the night Dad walked into my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and said something I'll never forget. I should have stepped in sooner. And what followed next wasn't just a turning point. It was the beginning of a transformation. The start of something I didn't even know I needed. And it came in the form of a dusty old gym, a worn-out punching bag, and a teacher who didn't care what your last name was, only how hard you were willing to fight. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you've ever gone through something like this, leave a comment below. We read every word. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that speak to the heart. The first time I stepped into that gym, I almost turned right back around. It was tucked between a feed store and an abandoned laundromat on the east side of Austin. An old MMA gym, with faded posters of past fighters taped to the walls. The air thick with sweat, leather, and the dull thump of fists hitting pads. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find a skinny 17-year-old kid with glasses and a backpack full of textbooks. But it was the place my dad took me to. He didn't say much on the ride over. Just that it was time I learned how to stand my ground. I remember thinking it was a punishment at first, some twisted lesson in toughening up. But when he handed the registration form to the front desk, he just looked at me and said, "Son, I'm not gonna let anyone make you feel small again, not even family." That sentence stuck with me. I wasn't there to become a fighter. I was there to become someone who didn't flinch anymore. The first few weeks were brutal. I couldn't throw a punch without spraining something. I gasped for air after 5 minutes of drills. My arms ached so badly at night I could barely lift my fork at dinner. But the pain didn't scare me. The ridicule at home had hardened me to that. What scared me was the possibility that maybe I'd never change. But something strange started happening. Every drop of sweat, every bruise, every sore muscle, it built something in me. Not just strength, not just speed. Resolve. I started walking taller. My shoulders stopped slumping. I looked people in the eye. My voice didn't crack when I answered questions in class. And slowly, people began treating me differently, not because I got stronger, but because I stopped looking like a victim. Even Ricky noticed. One Saturday afternoon, I came home to find him in my room. Again, this time, he was rifling through my desk drawer where I kept my chore money cash. I'd been saving for months to buy a second-hand laptop. He was stuffing it into his pocket like it was his birthright. I didn't freeze. I didn't shout for mom or dad. I just stood in the doorway and said, "Put it back." He laughed in that same smug way he always did. "What are you gonna do? Tell on me?" "No," I said. "I'm gonna take it back." He moved toward the door to push past me, but this time, I didn't move. My body didn't shake. I didn't shrink. I stood my ground, and when he shoved me, I hit him just once, straight in the jaw. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but because I knew I had the right to defend what was mine. He stumbled back, shocked. I took my money out of his pocket and dropped him back on the floor with one clean shove. His face turned red, not from pain, but from something unfamiliar. Fear. For the first time in his life, Ricky knew I could hurt him. Not because I wanted to, but because I could. He ran crying to Mum, wailing like a child. She came storming down the hall, demanding to know what happened. When she heard that I'd hit him, her jaw dropped. But instead of scolding me like she always did, she hesitated. Dad walked in moments later, and for once, he didn't just listen, he asked. I told him the truth. How Ricky stole from me. How he'd been doing it for years. Ricky tried to twist it, saying he needed the money for a date and that I should have helped him because that's what brothers do. Dad looked him square in the eye and said, "Son, you're lucky your brother only hit you. Someone else would have called the cops." It was the first time Ricky didn't get away with something. The shift in our house was subtle, but it was real. Ricky still tried to bully me now and then, but the dynamic had changed. I wasn't prey anymore. He avoided direct confrontation, stuck to muttering insults when no one was around. But he knew the balance had tipped, and that terrified him. I kept training, kept growing, and the more I did, the more I began to understand something essential. Strength wasn't just in your fists, it was in your spine, in your silence, in knowing when to stand tall and when to walk away. I stopped needing my parents to defend me. I stopped hoping Ricky would change, because I had changed. The house still wasn't a safe place. Not really. The favoritism didn't disappear overnight, but something inside me had shifted permanently. No longer felt like the forgotten son. I felt like a man. And with that strength came clarity. I started looking beyond the walls of that home, toward a future that might actually be mine. So when I got that scholarship letter from Texas A&M full ride, pre-engineering, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about leaving home. It was about finally building one of my own. The day I left for college, the Texas sky was a wide stretch of gold and lavender. I remember standing beside my old pickup truck, my entire life packed into 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box filled with books and tools. Dad clapped me on the back, told me to make him proud. Mom hugged me just long enough to say, "Call when you get there," and Ricky barely looked up from his phone. It didn't matter. I wasn't leaving to be missed. I was leaving to begin. Texas A&M welcomed me with open arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be seen without being judged. No one here knew me as the weird brother or the quiet one. I was just a kid from Austin with a scholarship, a solid handshake, and a stubborn work ethic. The air felt different there. I could breathe. I could walk across campus without looking over my shoulder, without dodging insults. The silence in my dorm wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. I found a rhythm. Classes in the morning, MMA training in the evening, a job at the bookstore on weekends. Every penny I earned went toward things that were mine. My rent, my food, my life. For the first time, I was building something with my own hands. That's when I met Susan. It was during sophomore year, at a campus barbecue, behind the student center. She was holding a tray of sweet tea, her laugh carrying across the yard like music in the summer air. We started talking about nothing music, old movies, our mutual hatred of calculus. She had that rare kind of warmth that makes you feel like you've known her forever. And after a childhood of walking on eggshells, that kind of warmth felt like a miracle. She came from a small town just north of Dallas, raised Catholic, strong, family values, smart as a whip. The kind of woman who knew how to fix a leaky sink and recite poetry in the same breath. We started dating, and everything clicked, not like fireworks, but like puzzle pieces. Steady, certain. We talked about marriage early on, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. And when Susan found out she was pregnant during our senior year, we didn't panic. We stood in our tiny off-campus kitchen, hands locked, and we made a decision. We'd get married after graduation. No drama, no running. Just two people stepping forward. Our wedding was small, just close friends and family. We kept it simple: white roses, vows under an oak tree, barbecue for dinner. Even Mom and Dad showed up, both smiling like everything had finally settled. Ricky was there too. Quiet, polite, even he brought a gift. Cheap whiskey and shook my hand like we were brothers again. I should have known something was off, but in that moment, with Susan by my side, and our baby boy growing inside her, I let myself believe the past was done with us. That marriage, that life, I believed in it, with everything I had. I wasn't looking for anything else. I didn't want excitement, I wanted peace. I wanted the kind of love that came home tired, ordered takeout, and fell asleep on the couch holding hands. And for a while, that's exactly what we had. I worked hard, got promoted at a local engineering firm. Susan stayed home with the baby, made our little apartment feel like a home. On weekends, we took Ethan to the park, read books together, watched old westerns with popcorn on the floor. I wasn't chasing some perfect dream. I was living something real. But life has a way of testing the structures we build, no matter how solid they seem. Sometimes it's a storm. Sometimes it's a crack in the foundation. And sometimes it's the return of a shadow you thought you'd already outrun. The signs were small. At first, odd phone calls, sudden trips, half smiles that didn't reach her eyes. I chalked it up to exhaustion, to the pressures of young parenthood. I didn't want to admit the possibility that something darker was coming back into our lives. But deep down, a part of me already knew, because the past doesn't stay buried. Not when the one who helped bury it never left. Not when the shadow's name is Ricky. And the next time he stepped into our lives, it wouldn't be with a punch or a prank. It would be with something far worse. Something that would tear everything apart. It didn't happen all at once. The unraveling of a marriage, especially one built on years of shared struggle, doesn't come crashing down in a single day. It begins quietly, like a small hairline crack in a window pane. You barely notice it at first. Maybe you think it was always there. Maybe you tell yourself it's nothing. But then the sun hits it just right, and suddenly, it's all you can see. That was how the betrayal began. Susan had always been open, talkative. She'd tell me every little detail about her day, what Ethan ate, what show she watched, which neighbor's dog barked too loud. But somewhere along the way, her stories grew shorter. Her smiles turned automatic, and her eyes, they stopped meeting mine. It started with the phone calls. She'd step outside to talk, whispering under her breath, claiming it was her sister or someone from church. The conversations never lasted long, but she always came back inside with a strange energy, restless, disconnected. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd smile and say, "Just tired, that's all." I wanted to believe her. God, I needed to believe her. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who suspects shadows in every corner. Then came the business trips. Susan had taken up a part-time job with a non-profit that hosted retreats and community events across Texas. It gave her something outside of motherhood, and I supported it. But it wasn't long before the trip started to multiply: weekend workshops in Dallas, 2-day conferences in San Antonio, always with vague itineraries and co-workers I'd never met. I remember one night, after she returned from a leadership summit in Waco, she unpacked her bag in silence. I noticed a receipt in the side pocket, 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, a hotel room booked under her maiden name. She caught me looking and laughed it off. I shared the room with another girl from the team, she said. It was cheaper that way. I nodded, said nothing, but something in my chest tightened. The crack had started to spread. That Christmas, we visited my folks in Austin. Susan was quieter than usual, slipping away from the room often, claiming to be texting her cousin. But it wasn't just her behavior that was strange, it was Ricky. He hadn't shown his face in over a year. Last I heard, he'd dropped out of college and was working part-time at a mechanic shop. But when he walked into my parents' house that day, clean-shaven and unusually polite, I felt something shift in the air. He didn't mock me. He didn't bring up old wounds. Instead, he poured drinks, offered to help with dishes, even played video games with Ethan like a doting uncle. My parents were thrilled, convinced he had finally turned a corner. But I'd seen Ricky wear masks before. What I hadn't seen, what I refused to see, was how Susan looked at him. Not obvious, not flirtatious, just ... soft, familiar. They shared inside jokes I didn't recognize, laughed at references I'd never heard. Once, I caught them talking on the porch in hushed tones while everyone else was inside. When I asked what it was about, she brushed my cheek with her hand and said, "He's just lonely, John. Be kind." And maybe that was the worst part. The fact that she could touch me like that and lie so easily. After the holiday visit, she left early, said her sister needed help back in Dallas. I remember standing at the curb, Ethan in my arms, watching her car disappear down the road. A cold wind blew through my jacket, and for the first time in years, I felt like the outsider again, like the boy who used to sit alone in his bedroom, waiting for someone to care enough to notice. 2 weeks later, she told me she was pregnant. The timing didn't feel right. But I didn't ask questions. I smiled. I kissed her belly. I convinced myself that everything was okay, that I was just being paranoid, because when you love someone, when you've built a life with them, it's easier to rewrite the truth than face it head on. But the truth doesn't stay buried. It festers. It rots beneath the surface. And one day it rises legally undeniable. And for me that moment came 3 years later. On a Tuesday night, when Susan sat across from me at our kitchen table and whispered words that would shatter everything. "I need to tell you something ... and I don't know how." What followed was not just a confession. It was the sound of glass finally breaking. Susan's hands trembled as they rested on the kitchen table. Her wedding ring clinking softly against the ceramic coffee mug she hadn't touched. The house was quiet. Ethan had gone to sleep hours ago, the cartoons still flickering silently on the TV in the living room. Outside, the wind carried the soft hum of crickets. But inside that kitchen, there was a silence so heavy, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, eyes downcast. "And I don't know how." I nodded slowly, feeling my heartbeat echo in my throat. For a moment, I thought maybe it was another affair. Maybe the trips. Maybe the receipt. Maybe all the small, bitter suspicions I had choked down over the years were finally standing up, pointing at the truth I'd refused to see. But what she said next wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity. It was annihilation. "It was Ricky," she said. "It happened ... back then. When we stayed at your parents' house over the holidays." For a second, I didn't understand. I blinked. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, though every part of me already knew. She didn't cry. That made it worse. She said it started as casual conversations. She was trying to bridge the gap between me and Ricky, help us reconnect. I'd told her about our past, the bullying, the distance, and she thought maybe she could help fix what was broken. But Ricky didn't want to fix anything. According to her, he'd been charming, supportive, vulnerable. She said when talking about his breakup, she said they bonded, that it was innocent until it wasn't, until late nights turned into whispered flirtation. And then one night, while I was asleep in the next room, he kissed her, and she let him. I stood up, but my knees buckled. I braced myself against the counter like I'd been punched in the gut. Susan kept talking, like she was trying to bleed out the guilt through her words. She said she regretted it, that it was a mistake, that it never should have happened again. But it did, over and over, for months, while I stayed up late working on design proposals, while I took Ethan to the park, while I believed in us. And the final blow, what drove the knife through bone, was when she said she wasn't sure if Ethan was mine. My entire world collapsed in that moment. The child I had loved, held, raised, read bedtime stories to. The child whose first word was Dada, whose laughter could pull me out of the darkest thoughts, might not even be mine. I don't remember sitting back down. I don't remember the rest of what she said. I just remember the cold spreading across my chest, a numbness so absolute it felt like drowning. I asked her one question. "Are you still in touch with him?" She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded, said they still met up sometimes. That it was mostly over, but she wasn't sure. That there was something about Ricky she couldn't let go of. She spoke about chemistry, about confusion, about how she didn't know when it all spiraled. But I did. It spiraled the moment she let him in. Into our home, into our marriage, into our family. She begged me not to walk out. She cried. Finally. Said she still loved me. That we could fix this. That families fall apart, but they can be stitched back together. But I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just walked to the bedroom, packed a bag, and left. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally started loving myself. As I drove through the dark streets that night, the pain hit in waves. Not just from Susan's betrayal, but from Ricky's. My own brother. The boy I once protected from bullies. The boy who shared a room with me. Who stole my things, my peace, my childhood, and now had stolen the one thing I thought was sacred. My family. The rage wasn't hot. It was cold, measured, focused. I knew what I had to do. And it started with telling the one person who had defended me. Finally, when I needed it most. It was time my father heard the truth. All of it. It was early morning when I pulled into my parents' driveway. The sky still bruised with the last traces of night. The house hadn't changed. Same chipped white siding. Same wind chimes hanging from the porch. Same faded welcome mat. But something inside me had. I stood at the front door, hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of everything I was about to say. Years of silence were about to break open, and there would be no turning back. Mom opened the door, still, in her robe, a coffee mug in one hand. John, she blinked, confused. What are you doing here this early? Is Dad up? I asked, stepping inside without waiting. He was already at the kitchen table, flipping through the sports section like he did every morning. A plate of toast untouched beside his coffee. When he saw me, his brows furrowed, like he could already sense something was off. He didn't say anything, just motioned to the chair across from him. I sat down. What I said next didn't come out in a flood. It came like stones, low, heavy, and impossible to take back. I told them everything. About Susan, about Ricky, about the affair, about the possibility that Ethan wasn't mine, about the months of lies and silence and betrayal. I laid it all out. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just truth. Measured, real, undeniable. Mom's face paled, her hand flying to her mouth. No, she whispered, as if saying it out loud might make it untrue. Ricky would never, not to you. Dad didn't say a word. Not at first. He just stared at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee mug. Let me talk to him, I said. But I want you to stay quiet and listen. I need you to hear it from him. They nodded. I dialed Ricky's number, put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy. John, it's early, man. What do you? Don't lie, I cut in. I know about you and Susan. She told me everything. Silence. Then, she's lying, he snapped, voice sharpening. She's always been crazy. You know that. You're really gonna believe her over your own brother? I leaned forward, kept my voice steady. She told me it started during that Thanksgiving visit. That you kissed her. That it didn't stop. That Ethan might be your son. Another pause. Then he laughed, short and bitter. So what if she wanted me? I didn't force her. Maybe you should have been a better husband. I glanced at my parents. Mom looked like she'd seen a ghost. Dad's face had gone completely still like stone just before it cracks. You think this is funny? I said, voice low. You think sleeping with your brother's wife is something to brag about? Ricky scoffed. Don't act like you were some saint. Maybe if you weren't so boring, she wouldn't have come looking for someone else. And there it was, the confession, the mask slipping, the golden boy, stripped bare. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee mug jump. That's enough, he said, voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Give me the phone. I handed it over. Ricky, Dad said, his voice slow and controlled. You didn't just betray your brother. You betrayed this family. You've broken every ounce of trust we had in you. Dad, come on, Ricky began. No, he cut in. You don't get to talk now. I raised you better. I covered for you more times than I should have. But this, his voice broke slightly. This is evil. On the other end of the line, Ricky went quiet. You're done, Dad continued. The college fund, gone. The car payments, done. I won't pay a cent more to a man who could do this. To his own blood. You want to act like a man. Fine. Live like one. But don't ever call this house again. He ended the call. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt in years. Mom didn't say a word, just stared into her coffee like it might somehow explain the son she thought she knew. I stood up. My legs were steady this time. I'm getting a divorce, I said. We're running a paternity test, and no matter what the results are, I'm done with both of them. My father nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine not as a parent looking at his child, but as a man seeing another man who had endured more than he ever should have. I'll help with the lawyer, he said. Whatever you need. And then, something I hadn't felt in decades past between us. Respect, not pity. Not regret, respect. That night, I checked into a motel off I-35. The kind with flickering hallway lights and buzzing vending machines. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear of waking up to a lie. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because the truth may set you free, but it also leaves scars. And the next one was going to cut even deeper. The divorce didn't happen overnight. These things never do. There were lawyers, papers, a paternity test that took 10 days, but felt like 10 years. Susan and I sat in separate rooms during mediation, her eyes red, mine blank. We spoke only through attorneys. What once was a partnership built on trust, built on dreams, had become a battlefield where even silence felt like a weapon. The test results came in on a rainy Tuesday morning. Ethan wasn't mine. The sentence was printed in cold black ink. No emotion, no hesitation, just the truth, clinical and undeniable. I held the paper in my hands and stared at it for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in that quiet apartment now, half empty, and let it sink in. The boy I had tucked in every night, the one who'd called me dad since he could speak, the child whose laugh could melt away the worst of my days, was my brother's son. And suddenly, it wasn't just the marriage that felt like a lie. It was everything. Susan reached out, of course. She begged to talk. She pleaded that we keep things amicable, especially for Ethan's sake. She asked if I could still be part of his life. And I wanted to. I really did. But every time I looked at that boy, his nose, his eyes, his smile, I saw Ricky. I saw the betrayal in the shape of a child's face. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't untangle that knot in my chest. Maybe someday I'll be strong enough to separate the sin from the innocent, but not then. Not after everything. I walked away. I left Susan the house. I didn't fight for furniture, or the car, or money. All I wanted was distance. I moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town, 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, and a silence that finally felt like peace. There were nights when the quiet hurt, when the space beside me in bed felt like an open wound, when I'd hear a child laughing on TV and have to walk out of the room. Healing, it turns out, isn't loud, it's not dramatic. It's slow, it's quiet. It's 1,000 tiny moments where you choose not to go back. I started therapy. For the first time in my life, I sat across from someone who didn't interrupt, didn't minimize, didn't make excuses. I told her about Ricky, about Susan, about growing up in a house where I was always second place. And slowly, word by word, I began to understand. None of it had been my fault. Not the favoritism, not the betrayal, not even the failure of the marriage. I had carried guilt like a second skin. And now, piece by piece, I was shedding it. I started finding joy in small things. Sunday coffee on the balcony, books I'd always meant to read, learning how to cook more than just eggs and toast. And for the first time in years, I was building a life that didn't revolve around making someone else happy. My dad visited often. He helped install a new water heater, took me golfing on weekends. We didn't talk about Ricky. Not much needed to be said. Sometimes healing between 2 men comes in the form of doing things with your hands, not your words. As for Mum, she stayed quiet. I knew she was hurting too. I think, in some way, she still couldn't believe her golden boy had turned into a stranger. Maybe she never would. But silence was her choice now, not mine. And I had made mine. I had let go of Susan, let go of the illusion of family, let go of the pain I once let define me. And while letting go doesn't mean forgetting, does mean freeing yourself from the chains of what could have been. Still, even peace has a way of being tested. Because, just when I thought I had turned the last page of that story, Ricky came calling. It had been 5 months since the divorce. The dust had settled. The silence I'd learned to live in had grown into a kind of comfort and earned quiet, not the heavy one I used to endure as a kid. My apartment was still modest, still a little too clean, but it was mine. My life had narrowed in scope, but deepened in peace. Then one night, Just past 9. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me who it was, before I even picked up. I let it ring twice more, then answered. Hey, John, it's me. Even after everything, his voice still sounded the same. Casual, soft around the edges, like we were boys again, like nothing had happened, like time itself hadn't broken something we'd never be able to fix. It was Ricky. I didn't speak, just waited. He cleared his throat, then launched into it. Fast, like he'd rehearsed it all, a dozen times in front of a bathroom mirror. He said he was struggling. He'd dropped out of his second college. Said the shop cut his hours. Said Susan had been pressuring him for child support now that the truth was out. Said he didn't have any money, didn't know where to go, didn't know who else to call. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the cracked ceiling in my kitchen. I listened. I let him say every word, and then I laughed, not because I thought it was funny, but because it was so predictable. You came to me, I said. After all you did, after all you took. I know, he said quickly. I know I messed up. But John, you don't understand, things just got out of control. No, said voice hardening. You don't get to call it a mistake when you kept doing it for years. You didn't just sleep with my wife. You made a life with her, behind my back, in my house. He tried to interrupt. I didn't let him. You knew what you were doing. You knew what it would cost. And now you want me to save you from it. He went quiet. Then, she lied to me too. She said she'd leave. You, she said, don't. I snapped. Don't you dare blame her alone. I already left her. She's your problem now. You don't get to call me because being the better-looking brother finally stopped working for you. He started to get defensive. His voice rose. Said I was being cold. Said I didn't understand what it was like to be cut off by your own parents. To have no one. You had someone, I said. You had me. For years. Even when you bullied me. Even when you humiliated me. I stood by you because I believed blood meant something. He didn't speak. You destroyed that. I continued. You don't get to come crawling back now, just because the world finally stopped treating you like the golden boy. And then, over the line, I heard it. Crying. Not the performative kind. Not the tantrum-throwing, throw things at the wall kind I'd grown up with. Real crying. Broken from deep in his chest. He said everyone had turned on him, our grandparents, our cousins, even the friends he used to party with. He said no one picked up his calls. No one wanted to hear from him. He was alone. More alone than he'd ever been. And for a moment, just a flicker of one, I felt something stir in me. Pity, maybe. A sliver of memory. The image of us building blanket forts as kids. Of riding bikes down the street in the summer heat. I don't know. But it didn't last, because for the first time in my life, I knew the difference between compassion and self-destruction. I don't hate you, I said, softly, but I don't owe you anything. Not anymore. I gave you years of my life, Ricky. I gave you my trust, my silence, my family. He asked if that was really it. If I was just going to hang up and never speak to him again. Yes, I said. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And then I ended the call. I sat there for a long time after that, phone still in hand. Room dim, the only light coming from the street lamp outside my window. I thought about Ethan, about Susan, about the boy I used to be, the one who never thought he was enough. The one who used to cry in silence while the house cheered for someone else. That boy was gone. I wasn't broken anymore. And I wasn't anyone's second place. But I knew one final reckoning was still waiting. Because no matter how far you run, family has a way of dragging its feet into the future, even when it's been told to stay behind. 5 days after that phone call, I got a visit. I didn't expect it was my mother. She stood at my apartment door, holding a Tupperware dish like she used to when I was sick as a kid. Her smile was tired, her eyes older than I remembered. She didn't say much at first. Just stepped inside, placed the dish on my counter, and sat at my small kitchen table like she had every right to be there. I poured her coffee, because that's what you do for your mother even when part of you still aches from the weight of her silence. She told me Ricky had come to her, desperate, begging, that he was living out of a friend's garage, working odd jobs, struggling to even afford food. She said she gave him groceries once, just once, and hadn't heard from him since. Then she looked me in the eye and asked me something I wasn't ready for. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth is, I didn't know. Forgiveness is a beautiful word. It sounds clean, noble, like closure you can wear like armor. But real forgiveness, the kind that reaches into the pit of your chest and demands you let go of something sharp, isn't easy. It's messy. It's terrifying. It asks you to surrender your right to revenge and trust that peace is enough. But what if it isn't? What if some people don't deserve peace? I told her I didn't hate Ricky anymore, that the fire had burned itself out. But I also told her this: forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. You can forgive someone and still choose to never let them near your life again. You can release the weight of bitterness without inviting the thief back into your home. She nodded quietly. I think in her own way, she understood. She'd spent her whole life protecting the wrong son, and now she saw what it had cost us both. Later that night, after she left, I found myself walking through the old neighborhoods of Austin. The streets where Ricky and I used to ride bikes, where we carved our names into the bark of a tree that's still standing near the corner of Briar and 8th. I passed the church, where Susan and I got married. Empty now. Cold stone steps, bathed in yellow. STREET. LIGHT. All those places once held meaning now. They were just markers of lessons learned. I didn't cry, not anymore. What I felt was something quieter, something steadier, peace. Not because I'd gotten justice, not because life had righted every wrong, but because I had survived it, and that survival didn't come from revenge. It came from the decision to stop bleeding for people who never offered a bandage. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you give someone else. It's something you give yourself. It's the key that opens the cage you've been locked in sometimes for decades. Ricky had made his choices, and he would live with the weight of them. But me, I was done carrying his burden. These days, I sleep better. I work harder. I laugh more. I take long drives without a destination, just to feel the road under my tires and the wind through an open window. I talk to Dad often. We don't bring up the past much, but there's a quiet understanding now. The kind that only comes after fire has burned everything else away. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll see Ethan again someday. Maybe I won't. Maybe Susan will find her own healing, in her own time. That's her road to walk. Mine is clear now. And if you've made it this far, if you've ever carried betrayal on your back, like a second spine, I hope you know this. You can put it down. You're not weak for walking away. You're not cruel for drawing a line. Sometimes peace isn't given. Sometimes you have to choose it, over and over, until it finally stays. And when it does, that's where your life truly begins again.